Hello and welcome to another episode of the Guards Podcast. I'm Nathan Rivard, and joining us today in the studio is the North Dakota Army National Guard Chief of Staff, Colonel Patrick Flanagan. Thanks for joining us today, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So wanted to sit down and talk to you about this because I'm sure most people know, but you do have a retirement coming up later this year. So before we have some knowledge drain in the organization, wanted to talk to you about what you do in your role, and then how you got to where you are. So really, the first one that comes up is you enlisted back in 1989 and attended basic training at Fort Knox. And looking back at that as a young soldier, what was your primary motivation to actually join the National Guard?
You know, again, thanks for having me, Nate. So when I was thinking about this recently, and probably in my mind coming up with some stuff to say when I have a retirement ceremony, and I look back at this young kid in '89, and I was going to college here in Bismarck at BSC. Had a really tight group of friends that were all in engineering together, taking courses and stuff, and was trying to figure out if college was exactly the right thing that I wanted to do at that time. I had graduated from high school in '87, took a year off from doing anything, and then I went to college, started, and then one of my friends that I met in college was in the Guard, and for some reason we were probably over beers one night having a conversation about the Guard and the stuff that he was doing, and so he kind of lead me to go talk to the recruiter at the time, Jake Riley. Some folks in our organization have an affectionate name for Jake, but I'll just let them smile and remember that. But so I talked to him, and then and my friend Mitch was in the 835th medical unit in Fargo, and I don't know that I had anything in my brain that I wanted to go into medicine, a medical field, or do anything like that. But when I went and talked to the recruiter, and he looked at my ASVAB scores, and he's like, well, you scored moderately high and didn't really know what that meant, or didn't really care what that meant, but it gave me the opportunity to select a position in the Guard that was the X-ray tech, 91 Papa, and there was a vacancy for that, and then I looked at that, selected that. But back to, why did I join the Guard? I think part of it was I didn't know exactly what I fully wanted to do. I mean, I have an analytical engineering mind, and I certainly enjoyed engineering, but I wasn't 100% sure that was what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, and kind of looked at this as an opportunity to, well, in the future, maybe this helps me pay for some more school. But as I met the recruiter and had this opportunity to go to X-ray school through the military, the great benefit for that, and at the time that was the military school was accredited to get you a national registration licensure to be an X-ray tech. So instead of going to school and paying for it, the military was going to send me to school and pay me, which was very advantageous. So did that and left for a little over a year, because went to basic, and then from basic went down to Fort Sam and was there for several months, and then upon finishing the classroom portion, then we went into the OJT portion, on the job training portion, which then, despite being told that if you were the honor grad you could pick where you got to go, I got to go to Fort Leonard Wood. So and it turned out, I enjoyed Fort Leonard Wood. We had a really good time in the hospital at Fort Leonard Wood during that time frame. So that was in 1990. Then was exceptionally busy. The ramp up to the first Gulf War had occurred. The war broke out while I was there, and then we were exceptionally busy. So, but it was really, really a good experience. And then got done there and came back to North Dakota, and several months after that, then I was actually able to apply for a job here at a local hospital, and as an X-ray tech, and got hired. And then I didn't, the Army gave me a benefit of sending me to school, college type thing, while they paid me. So and then after that, several years later, while I was working at the hospital, decided to go back and pursue a different degree. But from day one, me being in the military, the Army has afforded me opportunities that I didn't even probably realize were gonna be available for me, and it shaped everything that resulted in me being where I'm at today.
So when you say on-the-job training too at Fort Leonard Wood, so legitimately you were at your training, and then your on-job training wasn't like, all right, we're running scenarios. It was they sent you to a hospital, and you did legitimate, like you're working at the hospital.
100%. So we were again down at Fort Sam, and it was all classroom stuff. So when we were at Fort Sam, we had some civilian instructors, and then we had military instructors. So then when we finished that, then they sent us to the different Army hospitals around the country. So essentially an internship. And when we got there, there was two other classmates of mine that were in the same class I was that came to Fort Leonard Wood with me. So I if I go back, when we were at Fort Sam, we started with like 44, and I think 15 of us graduated. It was moderately stressful. You didn't get a lot of opportunity to not do well in that course, and they weeded you out. Part of that was because it was accredited civilian-wise, and the civilians came back in and said, "Look, if you're going to graduate people that can't pass a national registry, we're going to pull your thing." But anyway, so yeah, we get to Fort Leonard Wood, and it's on the job training where we went into the hospital. There was 5 or 6 civilian X-ray techs working there, and at the time there were 4 or 5 military X-ray techs there. About 2 weeks after we were there, the war picked up. They had the very large naval vessel that's a hospital over in the Gulf, and all of our active duty X-ray techs got pulled. So it was the civilians and us as students working, taking X-rays, working in CAT scan, working in nuke med, doing ultrasound, and then so the way it evolved is during the day we would go and we would be on duty 7 a.m. to probably 1600 or so, working with the civilians, getting mentored, but they basically they're shadowing us and making sure we're doing exams right. And then every other week, starting at 1600, they would leave and we would work the evening shift alone. And so in about a 7-month period working at Fort Leonard Wood at the hospital there, I without question in my mind, I took more X-rays in 7 months at Fort Leonard Wood than I did in 6 years working at St. A's here in Bismarck.
So definitely good training then.
It was phenomenal. I mean, a lot of from a military training post, a lot of trauma. We did receive quite a few of the soldiers that were injured over in the Gulf that came back. There was some other things going on in the country with hospitals being remodeled and updated. So Fort Leonard was a very, very busy hospital, and it's a busy training post. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. So yeah, it was great. It was a great experience. I was I'll be honest with you, a little reluctant of wanting to maybe as a 21-year-old kid go to Fort Leonard Wood in the middle of nowhere, but absolutely had a great training experience. Had met some people down there and had a wonderful time. And I remember coming back and all my friends gave me crap because I had a Southern accent when I came back. And I tell people, I said, well, you don't have a Southern accent when you're in Missouri. You have a Missourian accent. And now my sister, brother-in-law, and my niece and nephew live in Missouri. So when I see them, they have that same hillbilly accent.
So then you said you when you came back, you immediately went right into the workforce, and then additionally, you later commissioned as a medical service officer. So what sparked your desire to transfer over from an enlisted member? You're doing the X-ray tech, doing that work, and then want to become an officer.
Yeah. So when I got back, it was early '91 when I finally got back. trying to remember. I'll say this wrong, and then my wife will beat me up because we got married the summer after I got back, but that was in 1991. So came back, and for the summer when I got back, it was I did a construction job, and then transitioned out of a construction job where I was working full time at the YMCA, and while I was there, was afforded the opportunity, got a job working at St. A's. Did that for several years. When I initially started, I was a part-time, 24 hours a week, and then it rapidly transitioned to full-time, working at the hospital. And it was great place to work. A lot of exciting things going on. A lot of boring stuff at a hospital as well. But great staff, great people. But as time went on, and I started looking at this and appreciating the people I worked with, it was not a job that I saw myself doing for 20 years. So, but I was limited because I at that point in time, all I had was a 2-year degree, and I had a training certificate from the Army that got me a national registry as a X-ray technician. So, decided to go back to school at the University of Mary, and part of my mindset back then, I was kind of thinking maybe pre-med type stuff, because learned that I did appreciate that. So I went back to University of Mary, got a hard science degree, did some extra courses and some other stuff just to round it out, because it was things I was interested in. And while I was doing that, I was working the night shift at St. A's. So it's interesting because a really good friend of mine, former guard guy, Colonel Brian Keller's retired. So Brian and I were actually hired at St. A's on the same day. And Brian got hired to work the night shift. While he was doing that, he was going to school to be a nurse. And then once he graduated nursing school, got hired as a nurse, I moved into the night shift and then went back to school full time. So I'd go to work at 11:30, I'd get off at 7, I'd drive to Mary College, stay at campus till about 4 o'clock, go home, visit with my wife and our brand new baby that my wife just had. So she's really always excited to remember that time frame for 2 years, and then sleep for a couple hours and then do it over again. But my ultimate goal in doing that was to give myself the opportunity to go on and do something as a different career. I just didn't see X-ray tech as a career. So then what ended up happening, I graduated, and then I was able to apply for a job with the state health department as an epidemiologist, and somehow convinced them that I was the right person to hire, and they hired me. So I did that job for about 6 years, and was still within my first 10 years as an enlisted guy. But while I was with the health department, my boss at the time, the state epidemiologist, was in the Guard as a Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, retired Shirley, and we were looking at the civil support team at the time was just a concept that was starting in the nation, and the North Dakota, we knew we were going to maybe eventually get a team, but it was a part-time opportunity, and started looking at it from my education background of having a hard science degree and all of these things, that I was actually eligible to get a direct commission as a environmental science officer, which was a position that could fill the nuclear medical science officer on the CST. And so from working a job that I absolutely loved doing as a civilian, working for the health department, and what I saw myself doing longer term in the military, it was kind of that turning point of, well, I'm either going to pursue and see if I can get a commission, or I'm going to get out of the Guard. And so it just so happened that I was there. This opportunity came up. I was able to get a direct commission, and that progressed as just a traditional M-Day job for several years, until then the civil support team stood up full time.
So then you talked about your civilian employment. And on the guard side, you previously served as a preventative medicine and patient administrative officer. How did that align with what you were doing on the civilian side?
Yeah, so with the preventive med position on the guard, if you're doing that active duty compo one, you're more interactive with your soldiers and day to day stuff. So an environmental health officer who's going, or hygiene officer that's going and doing that. From a guard side, it really didn't roll into a whole lot of stuff. I was working at the time the state medical detachment. We were doing physicals and traveling around the state. But when I first got my commission, that's what I commissioned as. But it was for a heartbeat, because I very very rapidly switched to the CST. I did go back and forth a little bit between positions, but I think of the preventive med position and the stuff that I learned as an enlisted guy, because if we back up a little bit and I say, I was an X-ray tech for the Guard and got all this great training at Fort Leonard Wood, and never one time took an X-ray for the North Dakota National Guard. I had legit, when I got in the 835th Medical Detachment in Fargo, I had an X-ray machine, and I set it up one time, but I'm convinced it was from Korea. It probably hadn't been set up since the end of the war, and I was afraid to plug it in, because we might not have even been able to plug it in, because I don't think that plug fit in the wall. But it was crazy old. So did a lot of quasi medics, 68 whiskey stuff back then, as would get training from our docs and different things. And then as time went on, as an enlisted guy, I switched MOSs. I'm going to say this wrong, I think it was don't remember the number, a Romeo, but I was a food service NCO, which worked with the veterinarians. Way more preventive medicine than I probably did as an officer, because working with the vets, my job as a food service NCO was to go inspect the TISA, go inspect the mess halls, and then any place that we would get food from. So the grocery store downtown in Devil's Lake, we would go up to the Hooterite colony where we would get eggs from and inspect them and things like that. So that was really more of from an enlisted side, preventive med. And then unfortunately, our vets were transitioned out of the Guard and they went to the reserve, and then which led to that position that I had transitioning away. And then I went to admin school and did admin for like my last probably 2 years as enlisted, giving me my experience now as an officer to do all the admin crap that I do, which is nothing.
So you've brought it up a couple times with the CST. There was a thought, and then it was a part-time, and then eventually, the CST now is a lot of full-time soldiers and airmen doing work constantly. So what is the CST for some people that might not know, and what is it exactly they do, and then how do you transition from part-time to full-time, and then really, being a leader on that team?
Yeah, so and we, a lot of people, I don't say it's lazy, but we've gotten accustomed to using CST. So the real acronym is WMD CST, Weapons of Mass Destruction Civil Support Team. The mission is to work with civilian first responders across the nation, work with some military entities, work with three-letter federal agencies, FBI type, and to respond to, it can be a natural occurring event, or it can be a human produced event that's maybe accidental or nefarious. So someone releases some type of a chemical agent that can kill people. Someone develops and releases a biological agent or a radiological agent. Big giant picture. It's to look at CBRNE effects that can harm human beings. From what we do what the civil support team continues to do is to work with first responders at all level, down to the city, the community level, and assist them in any type of event that could harm human beings. And I think of that. So one of the things that we did many years ago when we were still a traditional team is the train derailment that occurred up in Minot when there was, very cold night, train derailed, anhydrous tanker tipped over, exploded, and then released anhydrous into a neighborhood in the city of Minot. So we were still a traditional part-time team. So we went up to do that, and then our full-time team at the time counterpart was Minnesota, and the Minnesota team sent people here. So some of that was in that event where we had people going down range in level A suits to do some monitoring to protect the people and all of those things. That's the first real thing that we did as a CST, as a light team. It's progressed over time that we do much more that's away from the WMD aspect of it. So think of bad hurricanes that have come in. Hurricane, if I'm remembering correctly, Hurricane Katrina, when that came in. So the hurricane comes in, hits the shore, it results in thousands and thousands of orphan barrels and damage. And with all that water, a lot of the barrels become unrecognizable, the labeling comes off, so the civil support teams have gone in and do that. Other things like the Space Shuttle Challenger, when that exploded, there were multiple CSTs across multiple states because the debris field from that went from Florida to Texas, and then they were finding pieces, and a lot of that is solid rocket fuel and different things that could be harmful. And we have the ability to not just respond if we're looking for something bad that's happened. So if something's released or there's a bunch of illness or something, but it's even if there's we think of a tornado hits a small city, we have extensive communication capabilities that we can go and basically we can't power a large city, or we can't provide communication capability for a large city, but we can provide it for the first responders that are there trying to save lives. So a lot of different aspects of what they can do. So I think the second part was transitioning from full-time civilian work to part-time. So when I left the hospital, then I went to work for the state and was I will tell you, not really in the market for another job. I really enjoyed my job with the health department. I was the immunization program manager. It was a wonderful job. But an opportunity came up where the occupational health specialist position, which was a federal technician position, came up. So I applied for that, was accepted to do that job, and came into that role as a fed tech, and enjoyed doing that job. It was good. It's just a different avenue of doing preventive medicine. So probably the role where I'm actually doing preventive medicine for the Guard was when I was occupational health, as an occupational health specialist. So did that, and that covers large gamut of stuff back in even today, but it's related to it's hearing, it's vision, it's radiological, it's environmental, it's doing ergonomic stuff. So got trained through all of those things, would go out, and wonderful job. Had a couple of great years doing that. While I was doing that, then this opportunity for an M-Day assignment on the CST came up. Did that, actually, the CST opportunity came up before I became full-time. So it's kind of this transition. But then there was a little bit of going back to the med det as occupational health, because my full-time job is doing this, so they want me back. And then shortly after that is when the AGR opportunity came up, and I find it to be a funny story, but so we stand up the CST in North Dakota, and it's 22 AGRs, and we didn't have a full-time person at the time, so it just here's an opportunity. So they identified who the commander and a couple positions that were determined. General Haugen was the tag at the time, and named who the commander was going to be. The PA, and those came up. But then there were several that were open for vacancy, and one of them was the position that I held. MDA was the Nuke Med Science Officer position. So they advertised it, and I didn't apply. And I really enjoyed being the occupational health specialist. It was a great job. I liked doing it. Was traveling around the state, would periodically travel the nation to go to some great training opportunities, and so opportunity for advertisement comes and goes. So then they advertise again, and the second opportunity for advertisement, because I didn't apply, comes and goes. And so then they advertise again a third time. And they were rapidly, they were doing this. They're trying to fill the team, so it wasn't like months in between. So they advertised it again, and I just happened to be, I was down at PEC for the medical conference with Colonel Keller, and I think probably Marvin Zier was our commander at the time. And so I'm down there, and I make up my mind, and I finally put in an application. And it's primary. I would tell you the reason is I went. Really good friend of mine is my investment guy, and I went and talked to him about it. And I said, here's an opportunity for me to do this. And I was a GS-11 at the time, and he's looking at this, and he goes, to be less politically correct than I should. He's like, you're a dumbass if you don't take this job, because the worst that's going to happen to you is you'll retire a captain from the active duty pay scale, and you'll be way better off than a GS-11 at the max scale. I'm like, okay. And I looked at it, but I understood what the ramifications of taking that job were. I knew there was a lot of training of being gone and everything. But so I put in my application, and I applied, and Colonel Shirley called me while I was at PEC. And my interview consisted of him saying, are you sure you want this job? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, you're hired. So that was my application and my interview process to the AGR system. It wasn't very tough.
And then looking back now, or retiring as an 06 colonel, when your initial thought was, well, worst case scenario, I retire as a captain. So I'd say it's a pretty good step up.
Yeah, I think that when I was in the science officer position, and that's a captain position, because it's a specialty field and it's harder to fill. It is overgradable to major once you're DA select. So for me, I was actually looking at it that, okay, well, if I'm not a complete idiot and I get DA select, the worst case scenario here is going to be I'm going to retire as a major. And for my entire, AGR career, I've been an officer, and I've looked at this and I thought, there are probably 95% of the other opportunities in the civilian world and even in the military that you could go to, and you could dream about that being your opportunity to be afforded the opportunity to retire as a major is an incredible gift that I fell into. And then while the science officer, we had our commander at the time then retired, and they were looking for the new commander, and actually it was the XO that left before that. Brought in another guy. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Quire came in as the deputy commander when Colonel Rourke went out to do another job for the Guard. And when Colonel Shirley retired, then Colonel Quire became the commander, and that's when Mark moved me in to be the executive officer. And I think it was just the, as the science officer, you love doing science, but there was, you're still, as you progress, I was a junior major, but I was still working and leading the team and helping the commander, helping the executive officer at the time where during missions and during training scenarios, just day-to-day operations. It was apparently that's a lot to Mark, that he's like, well, I want Flanagan to be my XO because he's got skills that go beyond sitting behind a microscope or sitting behind a gas chromatograph mass spec, that he can do this. So Mark gave me that great opportunity to come in and be the XO. I had a bunch of the skills for doing some of that. The Occ Health job that I did as a technician, I already had budget experience. I didn't have employees, but you're essentially managing programs that are covering hundreds of techs and different things. So it kind of all rolled together in that aspect. But when I think about the science officer position, and I think about from a civilian transition and all of that, the one thing that strikes me is, I go back in time and I was going to Mary College and I was taking all these science courses, and I took this ridiculously stupid hard course called quantitative analysis. And it was a legit hard course. There was a 400 level chemistry class, and I think probably 20 kids started that, and 4 of us actually finished the semester and got through it, and then we had another semester of it. And it's old school gas chromatograph mass spec analysis, where you do all this and you're using a 2-foot thick book to look up things. Fast forward 10 plus years, now I'm the science officer on the CST, utilizing a gas chromatograph mass spec that runs off an algorithm on a computer from a class that I was taking, that I'm like, there is no possible way I'm ever going to use this again in my life. It was a weird, light bulb goes on. Oh, well, I guess maybe there was a reason I took that really hard, stupid class.
Well, what made it so difficult? Is it just a lot of, like you said, chemistry, or is it just the math adding on to it, or is it just a lot of thinking or research?
Well, and back in the day, so when we did that, it was a very tedious thing. So you think of the chemistry. So you're building up. You're taking organic and you're taking inorganic chemistry, and you're learning all of those things, and then you start throwing in, when you're doing gas chromatograph mass spec, to break down a chemical compound to identify what it was. Now the computer will take all those 15 pieces and put it together and tell you what it was. Back then it was dot matrix printers, where it would come out with a atomic mass weight of what it was predicting that this portion of this chemical was. We would take those, we would open a book, we would find it, and then you start rebuilding it from a book. You were the algorithm, the brain in your head. And the funny thing, this is another funny. So with a mass spec, with a GCMS instrument, they have the mechanism for breaking down the chemical. So it superheats it, and it goes through a column, and it brings it through, and it's reading all this stuff up. Very, very poor old understanding of it. But the column on these mass specs that you have in the lab is meters long, 30 to 90 meters long, but it's microscopic, a very small hole, very small amount of sample. Our gas chromatograph mass spec, our 30-meter column went out the window, down 3 stories to the ground, and looped back and forth, up and down, and was a moderately large copper tube. That's how different it was. It's funny to think about, because the damn thing was out the window, up and down the building a few times, and then back into the instrument. You're laughing. I mean, it's funny because now it's a thing that you hold in the palm of your hand and you take out, and it's 2 little grommets that plug in, and you put a little screw on, or a little nut on it.
So do you get these kids these days, they don't know how good they got it?
Well, I think it's, there's a little bit of that. I mean, the math you go back to, I mean, you think of a lot of it's done by the computer, and it's done by algorithms, and it helps you, but you still got to understand what you're looking at. You still have to truly appreciate it. I think some of the old school math equations, just even going back to engineering, where I felt like maybe the math was a little more complicated because we didn't have a calculator that had 1,000 options on it. So there's probably more skill in actually learning how to use that calculator now to make sure you're getting the right answer. But yeah, so.
So as we wrap up talking about the CST, if you had to pick like a highlight or really a career-defining moment on that team, because I know we'll talk about some other roles as well, but looking back at your time with the CST, what would you say is like a really just memorable mission, event, or something you get to participate in with the CST?
Yeah, so when I was the science officer, I mean, I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and being able to go through and identify stuff. We were very fortunate, as a team during that time frame, that we weren't really involved in a whole lot of live incidents. But when you talk about opportunities to travel to other states and help them out and assist, from hey, this is a cool event. I got to go out to the PGA Championship in Minnesota at Hazeltine as the science officer for 10 days. So go out there, have the opportunity to do that. So my job, we're there for 10 days, so we're there for the practice rounds and a couple days afterwards, and then PGA Championship, 4 days of golf, and I love golf. I'm not very good at it yet. Hopefully that helps in retirement, but probably not. But so I'm out there, and we go. And my job in the morning when I work is to go set the lab up, go through all the daily requirements for checks and everything, get that done, and then sit around. Well, and then it was working every other day. So I would work a day, then have a day off. And we were in a fire station that was about 2 blocks from the golf course. So even at work, we could go onto the golf course and walk around. We were allowed. We had our phones. We were allowed to be on our phones because police credentials. We go anywhere we wanted, and so we'd set it up, and then I would just go and hang out on the golf course on the days I worked. The days I didn't work, I would hang out on the golf course because it was awesome. But I say this because it wasn't a hard mission. It was just a great opportunity to go see all these phenomenal golfers and stuff. And at the time, I was not a Sergio Garcia fan. He was younger, and I just didn't, something about him, I didn't care for his attitude. And so I'm on the golf course, and it was practice. It was the last practice day on Wednesday, and again, I could go pretty much wherever I wanted. And I went up over this bridge. And there was a gal there, and she grabs the chain and closes it off while I'm standing there. And then she looks, and she could see my credentials, and she goes, "Oh, well, you can go through." I'm like, "No, I'll wait." And well, here comes a golfer and a caddy up this bridge, and they get there, and it's Sergio Garcia and his caddy, and he stops in front of me, and I'm standing there, and I'm kind of looking at him, trying to figure out what he's doing, and then it dawned on me, and I look at him, and I'm like, I said, "Sergio, I don't need your autograph." And then he looked at me kind of awkward and then turned and walked away. So, I mean, at the time, I took a lot of happiness in that I got to turn Sergio down for taking his autograph. So, so that was a memorable event. I mean, we had some other pretty cool things that we did and had the opportunity to when I was the commander during COVID, and I can talk about COVID a little bit later for what we did in the state. But when we were out in D.C. supporting the inauguration during COVID, and D.C. was shut down, so we had the team embedded in different areas of the city, going out with the police and monitoring, and I was working the night shift, and I was at a fire station incident command post that was just a couple blocks from the Capitol, and although it was very peaceful time. There was nothing occurred. It was just a very strange time to be in DC, because we would daily report to the big Armory Readiness Center there, and then they would bus us downtown to where we were going, and that's normally probably a 45-minute drive from that location, and it would take about 5 minutes to 10 minutes because there were no cars out, there were no people on the street, and it was eerie. I mean, the only people that were really out were the people that were working to support the inauguration event, because multiple checkpoints and all these things that happened. But an also unique thing with that is we were there when DC did a soft reopen. So, we are there, the inauguration occurs, we still had mission for a couple days to make sure that the city stayed safe. And so, like 2 days before we go, they're like, oh, well, we're going to open restaurants back up, and you can, they had their separate seating areas and stuff, but people could come back out. And it was pretty interesting to watch a city work through the process of coming back to life, is how I would describe it, because it's like, they had, DC was one of those areas that they shut almost everything down, where you couldn't go, different than what we experienced here, where it was still open in a lot of aspects. So that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, a few things. There's a lot of, I was disappointed. I was when I was the science officer, a good friend of mine was the science officer in Florida, and the Super Bowl was going on there, and they needed a second science officer, and she called me, but I was doing something where I didn't have my phone that exact minute, and about 10 minutes later I called her back, and she said, well, this is why I called, but the FBI didn't want to wait for 5 minutes for you to call back, so someone else is coming. So I got to miss the Super Bowl on that, but so that's, that didn't teach me to always make sure my phone was with me, because I've always had my phone on. So that's one thing. It's been interesting. So I've been on call for essentially 23 years, carrying my phone, and up until about a year and a half ago, I've had two phones. And so then when we downsized our phones, and then we had the capability of using our personal phones with different apps on them and stuff to get the same thing, it took me a little bit of time to get accustomed to only having to carry one phone. So, yeah.
Just walking, like, I feel naked. I don't have enough things in my pockets.
Yeah, lighter.
Yes, we'll come back to the CST in a little bit, but you also did move out of the CST and took on additional new roles as well. And one of those is you were the executive officer for the 68th Troop Command. So what do you think prepared you for that role, and why do you think they wanted you to transition into that role? Is it because you were just absolutely killing it as the ops guy in the CST, and they're like, all right, we want to give him some more responsibility? So what was it like working in the Troop Command, especially with, like, CST still falls under 68 Troop Command, but then you have all these other units that fall under there as well, so you're branching out into an even wider spectrum of responsibility.
Yeah, so when so it's funny. So at the time, full-time, I had left the CST, and I was working full-time in family programs as the family program director. And so, and I was militarily assigned to Joint Force Headquarters as the medical branch chief. So one day, and I've I don't know how many years ago that was, but I had been in the military long enough to know if you ask for something or you offer something, it's going to happen. So one day, randomly, and I was like, I'd go to JFHQ drill, which was fine, but they didn't really have an extensive role for me. So one day I went in, and General Huber at the time was the G1. So I went into her office, and I said, ma'am, I said, I would certainly offer up that I feel like I could do more on drill weekend if there was an opportunity for me to have a different assignment. And she goes, oh, all right, we'll give that some thought. I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I don't know that the organization thought about it for more than a day or two, and she called me back in and said, well, you asked about this, so now you're the XO of Troop Command. So at the time, Steve Bowl was the OIC in Troop Command. So he was in that role as a major. So the opportunity to move me in there, because I was already a lieutenant colonel, was to help out with the ability to be able to do counselings and sign some of the paperwork and that as the XO. So that was part of the I don't know. It's certainly very low probability that they thought Flanagan was killing it somewhere to put me in as the XO. But it was great. It was a great opportunity. I got to work with Colonel Jim Olson. Sergeant Major, when I went in there, it was Sergeant Major Alan Grinsteiner, and Alan and I, in fact, worked together at the health department, worked together on the CST when it was a traditional team. And then after Grinny left, then Sergeant Major Binstock came in, so I got to work with Binny for a while in that area too. So that was, I will tell you that I got way more out of that opportunity than the organization got out of me. I mean, it was great learning opportunity to do that. At the time, we hadn't yet restructured. The MPs were under Troop Command at the time. The CST was there, and that probably was because I was off the CST full time. It gave me, it probably helped Colonel Olson and maybe Colonel Bowl a little bit, because I could give him the more understanding of what that unit does and everything. So, but it also put me in a position where it advanced the people that I was responsible for, who I was counseling, who I was mentoring, and it kind of built that up. But I had great mentors in that unit with Jim Olson. Steve Bowl was, he's my subordinate, but he was, certainly a mentor for me in that role, and we worked really well together. I think he still talks to me, so I'm assuming that he appreciated it a little bit. And then the sergeant majors that, Grinny and Binstock. I mean, both are two superb men. I mean, they have done a lot they did a lot for this organization, and that was a great thing. Don't want to forget all the other really good full-time Troop Command staff, but those were some of the highlights there.
So, sir, as you said, you were working as well as the State Family Program Director. So what was it like taking over that role? Because it's a pretty big transition away from doing CST, executive officer duties. And that's a leadership role that spans across the entire state with multiple locations, people working, a lot of programs that happen there. So what was it like to do that job, and why was it important to you?
Yeah, so, the 100% not on my radar. So, all of us as officers, we do a career management plan, and I was not even familiar, I'll be honest with you, I was not even familiar that there was a family program director position. So I got, SOMB made the decision that that's where I'm going, and I got, called, and I think probably Colonel Hant maybe at the time was who called me, I can't remember, and said, "Yep, you're the new family program director. What do you think of that?" And I said, "That sounds good, sir." And then I needed to learn what that job was. So went and did a transition with Colonel Pauling, and was rapidly learning that I didn't know a lot about things that were going on in the Guard and things that were available to our soldiers, because I might have heard about a couple of events that occurred, but had no idea of some of the programs that we actually had available. So went in there. I was very lucky that I went in there at a time where we had a lot of funding for programs. We didn't get buckets of cash to do things, but the programs themselves were funded well from having employees in place, and it was we were kind of at a time where we were still doing quite a few deployments, and Yellow Ribbon program was underneath me, and had ample funding for that to have staff in place. And I had tremendous staff that were working for me as, at the time, the family program specialists that are now technicians were contract employees, but they were gifted, and they were phenomenally involved and caring and wanted to take care of soldiers. So that really helped, me operate in that job. And then our youth program was stellar. We had stellar people in there. So when I came in, it was kind of a shock of trying to learn these programs. And then it's what I kind of discovered is, there was, I won't say a reluctancy of acceptance for all of these things, but just like anybody else, they have some problems and they have issues, and kind of a communication, getting support back from other units, and really the job of everything that goes on in family programs is to provide for our soldiers and help them and do these things for families and veterans. But there's still, you still have whatever we want to call it, workplace conflict, where people aren't getting along, or people aren't sharing information, or people aren't doing what they need to do to support their soldiers. And one of the things that helped me with my staff and everything was, I would address the problems. I would contact whoever either whether it be an OIC or whether it be full-time enlisted folks, and we would talk through why are you not sharing this information? Why is this not occurring? But tremendously beneficial stuff that goes on for our soldiers, their families, and probably at the time lots of deployments, and we were in a position where there was some repeat folks that had been on multiple deployments, whether it's the ADA or whatever. And so Yellow Ribbon was kind of this up and down thing of whether units wanted to do it or not. But rapidly learned that even though you've got a percentage of your unit that's deployed, you've got a bunch of people that are not deployed, and you have family members that are not. So it was, at the time, it was still very, very important. And then from then, I mean, we haven't had as many bigger deployments as we were seeing back in the day, and now it's we're starting to see some more and everything. But we're now in a place where we have a lot of soldiers that have not deployed. It's not as like it was 15 years ago. So the Yellow Ribbon program has changed. There's not as much funding with it. We still have full-time staff for it, but the requirement for days has changed, but the importance of it has not. We need to ensure that our soldiers understand the benefits that they have. We need to ensure that their families understand all of those things when they leave, whether it's a CONUS mission or an OCONUS mission. It's still important because that person's not home, they're not always reachable, and that remains vital. And I joke and I tell people that I don't like children, because I don't, but the events that we do for family members is tremendous. My wife and I have always been Halloween nuts, so the Halloween events were a great thing for us, and I really like doing that, and I got the staff to be really excited about it. And I know that I didn't create that event. It was going on long before I was there. It's expanded some, and I know that it continues to be. Last year, unfortunately, with things that were going on with the government shutdown and the budget, we weren't able to do that event, which disheartened me a little bit, because I love doing it. But I know that next year it'll be back, and they'll have a lot of fun. But those were cool events to do, just to see all the smiling little rugrats that are running around, terrorizing the armory and terrorizing people. But yeah, that was good stuff.
So then, moving back to the CST as well, you did the family program role, and then you're back in the CST in January 2020, right as COVID's getting to full swing. You talked about the previous inauguration a little bit, but what was it like working on what essentially was the largest emergency response in our history? And you we're receiving tens of thousands of samples being collected, mass testings across the state. What was it like on your team to be able to coordinate that, manage that? You said already small team of 22. Like, how are you preventing burnout? And what was that environment like when all that was going on?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a funny story pre being on that mission. So we were up in Minot, and Army North, U.S. Army North was up for doing our lanes training, which is a precursor to doing our external evaluation. So they're in town. We're up in Minot. It's probably, I don't remember the exact date, but we did not yet have a COVID positive in the state of North Dakota. So we're up there doing this training, and day one, we're at the Armed Force Reserve Center, and we're doing an exercise, and the two local medias, reporters come out to do interviews at different times of the day, and so they're asking, and we're seeing COVID in the nation. Maricopa County in Arizona, they're hotspot in the country, and that's where it's just exploding. But we haven't seen it yet in North Dakota, so we're up there, do this exercise, and these two reporters, and I literally took them both in the building. I showed them what we're doing. They're like, "Are you training for COVID?" I said, "No." Explained our mission, that we work with first responders, that this is build up for this, and U.S. Army North is in there, and we finish the day, and everything is good. We clean up, get done, everything put away. We go out for dinner that night with some of the team members, and I'm at Buffalo Wild Wings, having some wings and a beer at the end of the day, and my phone rings, and it was General Dorman. And at the time, General Dorman didn't call me every day, and I'm like, huh. So I grab my phone and I step out so it's quiet, and it was General Dorman to call and tell me that we had our first positive COVID test or positive COVID case in the state, and it was in Minot, and it was in a person from the building that we were in training all day. So after that, it rapidly kind of took off. We rapidly, the next day, Army North figured out how they could get home a few days early, and we came back to Bismarck, and then we transitioned into this unknown world of COVID operations. The health department was establishing and setting things up to do different things. We were not yet even close to going out and doing testing, thinking about that. It was other things that the state was setting up to bring people in. I got to do some facilitating with them, and Miss Sherry Adams was down there, and we started working together and discussing a few things about testing and opportunities and growth, and all of these things kind of wound together into these 18-hour days of just planning and what we needed to start doing because we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if we were going to have thousands and thousands of deaths or how this was going to affect our community and stuff. And I was lower level, hey, help this where we need to go. So we were part of that, and then we started to transition into this idea of doing test sites, opportunities, and so we formulated a plan working with local public health, and a lot of it working with Sherry Adams. She's the Stark County emergency manager, public health director down there, and now she's also state health officer, and I can continue saying all the things on her resume. But great working relationship, and we worked with Sherry, with the health department, came up with this concept of doing some of these remote testing sites, and Amadon was the first one that started this whole business, and then it progressed, and it kept getting better and more functional. But before all of those things happened, we were looking at what's going on with all this planning and everything. So we had a couple people. So Colonel Tomac, Captain Hansen, myself were at the Capitol for a few days working working with the governor's staff up there, and then we decided to leave Tomac and Hanson there, and then we were working with the public health laboratory, so state lab down there. So went and had several meetings there, and we're looking at their ability to process samples and how that would work, and what it meant for capacity and how many they could do. And at the beginning of this, it was minimal, and then with the help of many other people, they were able to continue to acquire equipment and expand capacity and everything, but they didn't have staff for that. So then we looked at being able to supplement that, if we could do some rapid, just-in-time type training for folks down at the lab. So we looked at that, and we sent several folks down there to work in the lab and let them coordinate how that schedule looked. And then I kept a core portion of the team back to, as we were starting to evolve into this sample mission set, where we went out and we had several. I don't remember when we started how many we had, but we had put some MP folks on state active duty, and their role was to help with flow of traffic, setup, coordination, and then we had CST folks that were responsible for doing sample control. We had several folks from Army medicine and Air Force medicine that were coming and doing sampling. At the beginning, this was small. I mean, we didn't have probably more than 20 people on a mission, and then as time went on, this became multiple locations, multiple travel events. We had Fargo, where we had permanent sites for several months. Bismarck, we supported Bismarck, but that was primarily run by Bismarck Public Health, but we would go and support that. But Fargo had several sites set up. It was quite intense. But from a aspect of how did we handle it, I think that we look at the role of the CST is to help people, to go and respond in these emergency situations and do these things. Well, this became just an extended version of the 72-hour response that we were used to. So we would go and when it first started and we first started going doing sampling missions, then we determined that this was actually something that worked. I would come back, and General Dorman and Tammy from the governor's office would be having moderately late night meetings, and they would determine, well, we're going to go here now. We're going to go here and here and here. So sometimes it was moderately late at night that we'd get tasked to go somewhere new, and then call the team, and we would hit the road, and we would make that happen. And then it didn't take long for that to become kind of a battle rhythm thing of where we're going to go. So we would go to different communities, and then the communities would start taking it over. So in Dickinson, Stark County, their public health set up after a while where they took it over. We supported that. We kept some soldiers there full time. Fargo, we had a unit out there that was manning multiple locations, and then we had a individual embedded in the health department there as well. And it was, when we first started COVID, it was because everybody was scared. They didn't know what was going on, and we would, when you're out in the community and you're helping the civilian, and you could see the fear and they're scared, and they might not have been so scared for themselves, but these are cars with kids in them, and cars with elderly adults, and the people were frightened, and we were part of the factor of making them feel more comfortable to do that. And it was rewarding. I think part of the ability to go and do that for multiple days, minimal rest, was how much thankfulness we were just seeing in the eyes of people. And that's if there's something that's an epitome of why you're in the National Guard is what we did during COVID, because that's a true example of giving back to your community and protecting them. It's very similar to when we have fought the floods and helped save people's houses and stuff. So it's on that level of community is working together, and that's the other thing that helped make this a better event is we had so much great support from the communities, and communities came together and worked together with the entities that came down. We went to each of the tribal nations several times, a couple of them, more than twice, and we would do tests and they would set it up, and it was, this was at a time where there was some carryover still from the DAPL event that was going on when we were down at Standing Rock. But that was, one of the first things I said to that group of people. I said, we are here to help your community. That's the only reason we're here. And it was accepted, and it was tremendously grateful community of how North Dakota responded to that. Like, couldn't be prouder of the work that we did, and how well individuals performed, because they were tired, but they did it with a smile on their face. And I just trying to remember if I heard anybody complain about doing that, and I would be lying to you if I could remember somebody. I do remember a funny thing that General Dorman said at the time and it might have been, it was kind of later in the game, and he said, yeah, everybody hates COVID except for Flanagan and Tomac. I grew up, my civilian career growing up, I mean, from being an epidemiologist at the health department and many of the things I've done for my education and everything. I mean, if you're looking for a capstone event of something that you've trained your whole life to do, it actually got to happen for me at COVID, because that's where I, as a moderately young person, learned to focus on disease prevention, how you respond to these things, and I just happened to be the guy in the chair at the time, so that was more fortunate for me, because I think many other people could have been able to do exactly the same thing I did. It was just I had trained for it, and it was like, oh well, this kind of all ties together, and I got lucky to be the commander of the CST at the time.
So, sir, you served as the Deputy Director of Personnel in the G1, and then you also served as the Chief Information Officer, in the G6. So two pretty different things, but definitely massive domains to operate in, with people and then communications. So how do you think those two positions help feed into your current role as the Chief of Staff and basically be able to corral all those different offices and people's personality and basically technology that we have to use?
Yeah, so I think that, a lot of my ability to manage people and work effectively with, I'll be honest with you, in domains that I maybe didn't have a lot of experience in, was started when I was in the family program as the family program director, because I stepped into a role there where I wasn't familiar with the programs, lots of moving pieces every day, different budgets, different people to manage. I had every type of employee, from AGR to state employee to contract employee, Fed techs. So that helped quite a bit of a broader aspect of how to do things. And then when I left that position, went back to the CST for a while, and then I came back to the G1 as the deputy one, and for some degree that was a placeholder for me in between the time frame where I was select as to get promoted to 06, but there was not yet a control grade. So I went in there, but it got me, refresh my memory on all the programs, and it also, look at the change that happens, because if there's one thing that you fully have to embrace with our organization, not just the National Guard in North Dakota, but with being in the Army, is that the change comes and it's constant. So you can't always rely on something that you knew in the past to be an effective means to go forward. So, but that was great in going back into the G1, and phenomenal staff there. With the warrants and the senior enlisted folks there that have been in that human resource role for a long time, and they're stellar at their job. Makes ours much easier. And at the time, when I came back in, Colonel Lean was the G1, but she was also the Chief of Staff M-Day, and she was busy with that a lot. So some of my roles carried over where I was doing true G1 leadership stuff because Deb was gone. So that was good. And then when I left there and briefly went over to the G6, moderately you could argue fish out of water. Not an IT trained guy. I certainly know what a computer is. I know how to operate them. Can muster my way around installing an app and stuff like that. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't get put there because of my IT skills. I got put there because I can manage people and I can get people to work together and do things. And that's kind of why I was put there. It's not that my predecessors who were in the 6 weren't doing that. It was just a time for change where we had new programs coming. Army Cyber had changed things, and if you're familiar with our IT professionals, or if you're not familiar with our IT professionals, they are a moderately stubborn group, and they don't like to change things, especially when what's in place works really well. So it's frustrating for us as the user operator, but for them who make it work, it really gets frustrating. But again, not a skilled IT thing. I do like to tell the story that my ability, I compare my ability to Colonel Dave Hall. So Dave was the CIO before I came in, and when Dave retired, then I took his place. So Dave's ability in the IT world is, I liken it to, he owns a car. When he opens the window, he uses the crank and turns the window down. My ability in the IT world is, I have a car and I push a button to make the window go down. That's my skill level above the previous guy, because I have embraced modern technology. So that's and Dave loves that comment. So if he listens, but he may not know what a podcast is. So there's that too. So yeah, but again, and the other thing that's interesting about those two roles is because they're, like I said, with the HR or personnel folks, professionals, the warrants and the enlisted, they've been in those positions for quite a while, and they are stellar at it. The G6, same thing. You have people that have employees that have been in those roles where they've come in as a entry level technician, and now they've worked their way up, but have a specific skill that many people don't even have the capacity to understand. The ability to read code and make it work and fix it and stuff like that is a kind of outside my realm. And they that's where you put a solid leader in there, and then you can get more effective. And then it's even more impressive when you have now like a Seth Van Chettel in there. So he is a stellar IT guy, knowledgeable, can fix stuff and do it, and he also can manage people. And then you throw in the fact that he flies a helicopter. That's the improvement there is considerably broader from when I was there. So
just a triple threat.
Yes, so, I mean it's impressive. So,
and then transitioning into the now in your final position, the chief of staff role, a lot more managing people at the next higher level. How would you describe your philosophy for that position and making sure the mission gets done, all that staff work, all the routing, and we're not dropping balls across the organization to make sure things happen?
Yeah, I think one of the one of the things that I recognized when I first came into the chief role was there was a lot of director level, OIC level staff that would continually call me for basically how I feel about it is they were calling me to get permission to do their job, and I can't operate that way. Our organization can't operate that way. That we need our directorates and we need our OICs, our commanders, 04 and above, to perform at their rank and do their job. My job as the chief is to eliminate obstacles for my directors so they can manage their people to get the best out of them. And then it's also to, in some degree, reduce maybe a conflict. But what I really discovered also very very quickly, and I knew this before, but it's different when you're when you're managing folks, is that we really don't have all that much conflict in our organization. What we have is a lack of communication, where we don't get the two parties together at the table to meet and understand what one is even asking, let alone what they need. And we can't always get to where we want to be with 100% solution, but almost always we can get to a solution that's close. And if you're not communicating effectively, then you're not going to get that. So that was one of my big things that I really tried to get people to understand, that they have to communicate and let them do their job. I just think back to at a time when I was in family. You go back to family programs, because I feel like I learned an awful lot about the organization then. And when General Huber at the time was the G1, and she was leaving that position, and Colonel Pauling was coming in, and we had a meeting to discuss, Warren coming in, General Huber leaving, and how that should go. And I remember General Huber saying, "Look, you've got some of the best employees this organization has. Just let them do their job, and it'll be fine." And I took that away, because that's a philosophy that if you're micromanaging your people, it's not an effective means for them to excel. They may not always do the best work that they can because they're inexperienced. But if you give them the power to work, to make mistakes, to learn, they're going to excel. And that's just how I've tried to always be. I mean, there are certain times in my career where I have certainly taken projects that I should have let somebody else do them, but because of a suspense, or because of what I at the time perceived as needing a better solution, I would do that. I would take projects myself, and that's a lesson that I learned from a leadership too. Is you got to let your employees fail, and sometimes you got to let them not produce everything you want, because if you take their work from them, guess what? They're going to let you. And it doesn't take them long to learn that, hey, someone will do my job for me and I'll still get paid. So you gotta let them work. You gotta let them learn, and then if they don't do something correctly, you gotta educate them in a proper manner. I mean, I've been around this organization for a long time, and I from an aspect of working full time, have not experienced this, but I think of the Army and the way that the old National Guard used to be, and some of the methods for encouragement or mentoring were loud voices and yelling, and less than cordial responses. You don't have to do that to be a good leader, and I promise you that if you're communicating with your folks, if you're talking through whether they've made a mistake or whether they haven't met the mark, or completely done something incorrectly, if you educate them and you approach them in a civil manner, that's probably a bad word, because I think we should probably be a little bit even nicer than civil. It goes a tremendous long way, and it builds trust, and it makes better employees.
So, what advice would you give, like say, a young lieutenant who eventually wants to have your position one day as the chief of staff? I feel like you hit it a little bit right there, but is there anything else that really drives home?
Well, I think that, and I think a lot of our officers actually do a very effective job. And recently, the Army commander, myself, State Command Sergeant Major, CCWO, all went up and we visited with our officer candidate students. And I think all of us, all four of us, impressed on these soon to be new lieutenants is, you know what, you need to, when you walk in the room, you need to realize first and foremost, you're almost always not the smartest person in the room. You may have the most rank, but that doesn't mean that you have the most experience, again, or are the smartest person. And you need to listen to the people that work for you. That there is, when you have a team of professionals, and if they're full-time, if they're part-time soldiers and civilians, you need to empower your team to work, and you need to learn from them. Everybody on your team is important, down to the E1 up to the GO. Everybody is part of a wheel that spins around that makes this organization work, and you need, and really as a not even a leader, as a team member, you need to realize we are all important. We can, I think for our our really young lieutenants, the great thing I like about officer candidate school, when we're commissioning our soldiers, they're former enlisted, and that's a must. I think that not a ROTC kid, I think that's a great program too, but I feel like when we have officers that have spent time as a soldier and an NCO, that makes a better officer, because you understand and you know where they're coming from, and they're the ones that make this big giant mechanism roll. Our civilian workforce, our technicians, and our enlisted folks are the they're the main reason that we are successful, and we can't forget about that every single day. So listen to your NCOs, listen to your superiors. When you don't know how to do something, ask, because that's the way you learn. If you do something wrong, you need to take ownership of it. And most importantly, a philosophy of mine that I've had is that you also own your employees. If your employees make a mistake, miss a deadline, something happens in a work environment, you're the boss. That's yours. You don't cast blame to the throw somebody under the bus situation, because as a leader, if they're your subordinate, that's on you as well. I can't emphasize that, because it's important that we trust them to do the work. When they don't, you work with them to get it fixed, and then you own that it also didn't get done, because I promise you, we're moderately smart organization. We're going to moderately smart. That's funny. We're going to get to the bottom of a mistake, and it's not the mistake that matters. Ultimately it's the getting the job done and moving forward. And another thing that's really hard, and you learn this over time, but it's still difficult, is this concept of if you're taking a DEOC survey, if you're taking a unit risk inventory, whatever, the idea of passive leadership, where a individual makes a complaint and comes forward and talks to you, and then nothing gets done. There are certain situations that maybe you don't have to overreact and respond, because before you make a corrective action, you need to get both sides and understand maybe four sides to a problem, and look at it, without making a decision. You can't listen to one person and take their side. As a leader, you have to weigh all the evidence, weigh all the things, weigh all the factors, and look for solutions. But own your employees. Let them do their job, but have their backs when things don't go well. Is a bit of advice that I try to follow, and then mentor them. Leadership is easy a lot of the times, but a lot of times it's very difficult, because you do have tough decisions to make, and sometimes they're disciplinary, and they're not always. Disciplinary actions are, I won't say ever fun, because we have faith in our employees. We want them to excel, and I've had a few instances where I've had to discipline soldiers, and they are more, I think, distraught is maybe the word, of disappointing me as their leader than they are about that they actually did something wrong. And that makes me feel good and bad at the same time, because it's that they understand they've made a mistake, they want to do better, and when you give them the opportunity to learn from that mistake, I will tell you that nine times out of 10, probably even higher than that, they do.
And then we've talked a lot about, throughout your entire career, you've definitely hit on some highlights. If you had to look back through all of it, all the way back to 1989, other than the one CST story you've already shared, what would you put on your highlight reel as like some of your top things you've got to see, do, accomplish, just special moments that really stick out to you?
So, a few things. There's a lot. It's hard to pick some things that stand out. But I think of when I was in family programs, we had an instance where we're constantly trying to help family members, help veterans, help service members, help our soldiers and their families and stuff. And I had this, although there's no video here, most people that know who I am have probably never seen me with more than a little bit of stubble on the top of my head. So I have the same haircut that Nate does, by choice, but there still isn't very much up there. So, but I was at a training event at the Civic Center, and this short little lady named Cheryl was there, and she came up to me. She was my hairstylist back in the day, and she remembered me. So probably 15 years since I had seen her to get my hair cut. Not just cut, styled. I actually went to the hairstylist, which is very humorous to a lot of you out there. So anyways, I'm meeting with her and talking to her, and I'm trying to figure out, this was at Recovery Reinvented. This was the former Governor Burgum's wife's initiative, and we were at a training for that. And she came up, and we had a conversation, and I asked her why she was there, and she said, well, she's an advocate for different things, and she said that one of them was talking about her son, who, former Navy member that was struggling with addiction and hadn't spoken to his dad for like 15 years, and he was struggling in all of this. And I said, well, I said, I don't know for certain that my folks that work for me can help you, but he may be entitled to benefits to try to help him with his addiction. So got her the number. The family programs folks worked with her son, got him in a treatment program, sent him off, and I happened to randomly run into her probably, I don't know, 6-9 months later. She walks up randomly, gives me a hug, and says, my son came home and talked to his dad. Those are the events in my career that are highlights, that good things happen. some struggles with even family programs where we had some old veterans that were in the service that would come in and be looking for benefits or just simple help things. And one older gentleman, he was in the Navy during the time post World War II when the United States was doing a lot of nuclear testing on the atolls and stuff, and he had a partial service record that showed he was on those ships and stuff, and he was struggling and dying from multiple types of cancer, and they couldn't link him back to being on those ships. And we gave a very hard effort, but if folks are familiar with a lot of the military records and medical records and stuff, many of those were destroyed years ago in a fire. So that one was a little bit hard because I've seen a couple of shows on TV even that History Channel and stuff that have talked about that, and that one's a little sad. I could tell a lot of stories. We did a lot of cool stuff on the CST. Got to go to a lot of cool places. It was a great opportunity of a job. I mean, for almost 10 years, I got to be a scientist, and I had a multi-million-dollar lab with gas chromatograph, mass spec, a microscope, all this cool whiz bang toys that I got to play with, and that. I mean, hell, that was almost like not having a job. I mean, it was great. So that was pretty cool. And I tell you what, I got to go to a lot of really, really stellar training as the science officer, and as CST. But the science guy gets to go to a lot more. My other areas, I think probably highlights are more related to the people that I worked with and the friendships that I've made. And then I see people excel, where there was a long, long time ago when I was in E5. I don't know that anybody ever envisioned me being an officer, let alone chief of staff. So when I see these young kids that have grown up and now they're officers, it's awesome. It's a little bit frightening when I see these people that are probably almost young enough to be a child if I had other children than my daughter that are retired. That's a little weird. So, but it's awesome, and I just think that the continued desire of our young folks, and then as they grow up in this organization, the continued desire to serve is one of those great things. I think randomly I could probably sit all day long and talk about different highlights of cool things, great opportunities, great people that I've worked with. So it's probably a better thing to catch me with over a beer and tell stories.
And you've talked about this a little bit already too. Is there any mentors or leaders throughout your career that you really learned from, respected what they did, that you feel shaped how your career went?
Yeah, I think it started probably way back. I came in, like we said, in December of '89 as an E3, came in, and then left for a little bit over a year to go to school and stuff. During that time frame, was taken care of, got promoted to specialist, got some better opportunities at school because I was a specialist, because I outranked everybody. So got some even early leadership roles there. Came back, and when I came back, then our full time admin NCO switched, and it became Sergeant Dave Perlmutter, and Pearl and I rapidly became friends. He was my full time admin guy, and at the time he was an E7, and but we rapidly became friends. But he mentored me through a lot of stuff. I think without question, he encouraged me to do things that I didn't do. Would oftentimes remind me that I was being kind of a stubborn dumbass for not doing them. But he certainly shaped me as what I was when I was a young enlisted guy, but was encouraging for me to pursue my commission and do that. And then, the great thing about that relationship is Dave and I have remained friends since that day. And then our daughters were born a year apart, and they are best friends. And now, my daughter's 30 and Tanisha's 29, and they're still best friends. That's a very cool relationship that started with this crabby old guy that would yell at me all the time because, why are you doing this? But he was doing it the right way. He wasn't throwing stuff at me. So that was great. And a lot of other mentors that have given me opportunity. I came in the technician world. Colonel Brian Keller was the selecting supervisor. He gave me my first opportunity to work as a technician for the Guard. Brian and I have been friends for, again, I mentioned earlier, started at the hospital together. So we remain friends this day. It's funny because Mitch Barta, retired Lieutenant Colonel Mitch Barta, was on that panel, so he was part of the selecting thing, and then Mitch ended up working for me in family programs. But Mitch was always kind of that quiet advisor too. And then, retired Colonel Larry Shirley hired me into the AGR program. I worked for Larry at the health department. Still have a lot of respect for him. Just super smart guy, and he gave me opportunities to do things and to utilize my skills and my education. But probably the one that I still to this day think stands out the most is General Huber. She allowed me to do my job without interference. She always has had my back, and I sincerely appreciate that because that's impressed on me that if you let your people work and you encourage them to do a good job, and if they're not 100% getting where they need to, and you mentor them, that improves them. So and General Huber has always been that stellar supervisor for me. And the great thing now is we're General Huber, General Johnson, myself, we're all in the front office together, and she continues to be my mentor, but we're the front office here. We work together as a team, and it's the coolest thing that I've had the opportunity to do as an employee.
As we're wrapping things up here, sir, been going a pretty long time. Is there any last reflecting words of wisdom, something you'd want highlighted for people as they look back at this? We're dating all the way back to 1989, so we're looking at 36 years of military service as the traditional as well as full-time. So what about those last parting words of wisdom you have?
Yeah, so I think that we all say this. I think is that you look back and how fast time goes. There's slowness within your career, and there's time where you think that events are going to last forever, but 36 years seems impossible. I mean, it literally does. So I say take it in and enjoy it. I think that a thing that, and I don't know how to express this but you need to utilize the skills and the people that are around you, because they're going to make you look better. I almost feel guilty, because I allow people to work and do their job and somehow get credit for that, and it's kind of unfair. I would ask people that you certainly certainly work hard to remain humble, because it helps you. I mean, it just, you can't impress more on people that when you're doing something and you have teammates that are doing jobs, you're, as a leader, you get credit for it, and it's not yours. You need to recognize the people that are doing all that stuff for you, because that's important. Just that, at least it's important to me, and I think it's important to your staff members. But don't own something that's not yours to own. As you know, for the positive credit, I think that's a key thing, and this organization is such a, it's been such a pleasure to work for. That, again, not everything is great. I mean, not everything I have done as the chief is fun. Some of the decisions that we have had to make this year have been difficult, whether it's from what we're doing with our force structure, how many folks work for us, punitive things that we have to work through when soldiers make mistakes, get in trouble. It's hard work and it's difficult, but when you advance in positions of authority, you need to make those decisions. And one of the things that General Huber has said multiple times to me that I have passed on to other people as well is, you have to make the hard right decision, and it's, at the time, it's difficult especially when you're counseling an individual and doing that. So, but you have to make the hard right decision. You can't avoid it, and if you avoid it, what's going to happen is someone else is going to have to do it for you. When I came in, right as I was coming into the role of Chief of Staff, General Erickson and I sat down for a few days and we went over some stuff. And one of the things that left a lasting impression on me too is General Erickson said. He said, "Pat, in this role, you're not going to make everybody happy. You have to look at everything neutrally, and you have to make the best decision for the organization." And sincerely, that's what I've tried to do. But I've done that with the help of teammates, be it the G1, the HRO, the G4, working collectively as a team, and that's been a great thing. We have stellar employees and we have stellar leadership right now, and I don't see anything but a bright future as we continue forward here.
Well, I appreciate that last bit, sir, and definitely appreciate you coming in, taking the time as you transition out the door the next few months. Welcome to the next Chief of Staff. So thank you so much for not only coming in today, but for the 36 years and for being an excellent person to have working over me in the position I work in, and always being someone I can come talk to when needed. So appreciate it, sir.
I appreciate that, Nate. Thank you very much.
And we're out here with another episode of DeGuard's podcast, and that was Colonel Patrick Flanagan, who is the Chief of Staff for the North Dakota Army National Guard, talking about his career since beginning in 1989.